Mr Calvin Bailey to move the motion.
Ms Lewell-Buck, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Your Majesty, and to open the debate on local government finances in London. Because after 14 years of neglect and decline, I know this government is committed to fixing the foundations and getting local government back on its feet. Vital uplifts in funding have been extremely welcome, alongside the move to multi-year settlements and away from wasteful bidding wars. This is a government that stands for giving councils, like all our providers of public services, the certainty and stability that they need to go from costly crisis management to long-term prevention and the root and branch reform of local public services. These agendas are vitally important for our national missions on growth, on NHS waiting lists, on crime and antisocial behaviour, and are an opportunity for all our young people. I want to use my speech to lay out some of the main challenges facing local government, because these need to be fully recognised and addressed by government policy to stop further councils moving into crises. The economic and social changes that have relentlessly driven council costs upwards have been simply ignored by the Conservative governments. Since 2010, policy has at best papered over the cracks, rather than tackling these drivers and supporting our councils to adapt social change and its impacts. Instead, financial support has been reduced to the point where our boroughs are receiving around 28% less funding per Londoner than under the last Labour government. I will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and he's making a very important speech. In my constituency of Brent had to cut its budget by £220 million since 2010. Under the last Conservative government, they have suffered. Does my honourable friend agree with me that it's nice that we now have this change of direction by the new government?
Calvin Bailey.
Thank my honourable friend for her intervention. And she's right, and it's important that we recognise the circumstances in which we found ourselves and that we point to the measures that this government has taken to start the fix of this endemic problem, which I will continue to explain now. Over and over again, the Tories pass the buck without passing the bucks. Our councils have had to deal with wider changes to legislation and other new duties and responsibilities, even as financial support was repeatedly eroded. This challenge has been building and building. London's population has grown by 900,000 in the last 15 years, with massive consequences for rising demand for services, particularly adult and children's social care, SEND and temporary accommodation. I will.
Chair, can I commend the honourable gentleman for bringing this forward? And obviously, one of the biggest issues for all councils, London Council and other councils across this great United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland, is housing. Government has committed themselves to 1.5 million houses, and I think that's a very commendable strategy to move forward to try and address the issues. Does he also feel that whenever the houses come through, the issue of rental accommodation and the price factor, which many people are finding very hard to manage, has to be part of what government looks at, not just the provision of the houses, but to ensure when it comes to social housing and renting, they're actually possible for them people to rent them and then live in them.
Calvin Bailey.
Thank the honourable member for his intervention, and he is right, but we cannot adjust the market situation without adding more houses to the stock. Once we've increased the number of houses in the stock, we can then start tackling the private rental sector, and we are doing so, and I hope the Minister will expand on some of the measures that this government is taking to bring our landlords into line and improve the quality of the private rental sector. As a result, London's boroughs are facing an unprecedented financial crisis, one that threatens the vital public services that millions of Londoners rely upon, including my constituents in Leighton and Wanstead. Our communities are strong, but we also face significant challenges, from crime and antisocial behaviour to a shortage of decent, affordable homes. to the need for better opportunities for young people. All these issues can only be addressed effectively if our excellent councils can invest in our future. Many councils are now teetering on the edge of issuing Section 114 notices, effective bankruptcy, and these risks are increasing because the drivers of increased costs have simply not been accounted for. 7 London boroughs, nearly a quarter, require exceptional financial support for 25-26, amounting to over £400 million. London accounts for almost a third of the total national EFS funding of £1.3 billion. We need to seriously engage with these challenges and chart a sustainable path forward. According to London councils, London boroughs are forecast to overspend by £800 million this year, with particular pressures in homelessness at £330 million, adult social care at £200 million, and children's social care at £160 million. The cost to the public purse will be so much greater in the long run if we do not deal with this crisis now. The most acute financial pressure facing London boroughs by far is homelessness. The scale of this crisis is staggering. London councils assess that 1 in every 50 Londoners is currently homeless and living in temporary accommodation, including nearly 90,000 children. First and foremost, this is a human tragedy, and I, like many other colleagues, have been engaging with individuals and families who are suffering as a result of the housing crisis, including a very powerful visit that I had this Christmas with Crisis in central London. In addition to this human suffering, homelessness represents the fastest growing financial risk to London's local authorities, with our council spending £4 million per day on temporary accommodation, a figure that has surged by 68% in just 1 year. I give way.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way to securing this important debate today. I agree a lot with what he's saying about homelessness and the challenges that brings to London authorities, whether that's inner London and outer London. But that then does beg the question, why has his government cut the housing targets for Labour councils in central London?
Calvin Bailey.
Thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, but it is difficult to accept any kind of challenge when his government missed every one of their housing targets over the course of 14 years and ignored the fact that this trajectory was set under his government. And if this trajectory continues, homelessness alone will push London boroughs into bankruptcy. I know the government have been working hard to address the enormous challenges that we have inherited and which I've just pointed the Honourable Member to after the abject failure of Conservative housing and homelessness policies. We welcome the recent uplift of homelessness prevention grant, and this week the confirmation of £2 billion of grant funding for social and affordable homes across the country. But there are further measures which could provide much needed support to London boroughs. One issue exasperating the crisis is the cap on the amount of local housing allowance payable for temporary accommodation, which has been frozen at 2011 rates for nearly 14 years. Even though temporary accommodation has become massively more expensive in recent years, the cost of acquiring temporary accommodation for London councils increased by 68% in a single year up to 2023, while the number of homeless Londoners increased by about 8% over the same period. This has created a significant funding gap for local authorities. Updating this cap would provide immediate financial relief for London boroughs, which could then spend more resources on preventing homelessness.
My friend is making a powerful point, and the London councils have stated that 1 in 50 Londoners is currently homeless and living in temporary accommodation. And as my honourable friend has said, that the spending is around £114 million per month, which is approximately £4 million a day. Does my honourable friend agree with me that this is unsustainable?
Calvin Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. This is one of the three central pillars of the stresses on our councils, and is fundamentally, if we could address this, this will bring the greatest relief to all of our councils. And it's for that reason that another step that the government could take to tackle the homelessness crisis is to ensure that the LHA rates reflect actual housing costs. London rents have risen so fast in recent years that just 5% of private rented properties are affordable on LHA. This is pushing more and more families into homelessness, and I hope the Minister will set out the steps the government is taking to review LHA rates, because this could make a huge difference to so many families as well as to council finances. Additionally, a longer-term social rent settlement would stabilise council housing revenue accounts and allow boroughs to increase in building the new, genuinely affordable homes Londoners need, which we know is the only way to tackle the housing crisis. When deprivation measures rightly have such a significant impact on funding formulas, it is vital to ensure that they effectively account for the impact of rents. Housing costs are one of the biggest drivers of deprivation in London, and London is the third most deprived region in England once housing costs are considered. Beyond housing, the fundamental issue at the heart of London's council funding crisis is a growing disparity between funding allocations and the actual levels of need. The main local government funding formula has not been updated since 2013, meaning that allocations are based on outdated data that fail to account for population growth, demographic changes, or London's high housing costs. These difficulties can be illustrated by the councils that serve my constituents in Leighton and Wanstead. Redbridge has had population growth of 11.4% since 2011 and has huge pressures from homelessness, with a spend of £52 million a year on temporary accommodation. This is driven by the fact that Redbridge has an enormous private rented sector comprising 75% of renters locally. The eviction rate in Redbridge is at 4.6% per 110,000 renters, almost triple the London average, with 86% of those evictions coming from the PRS. There is no escaping the reality that shocking numbers of people in constituencies like mine are now being evicted as the housing market changes, and identifying creative policies to tackle this is truly urgent. Waltham Forest is facing massive pressures from increased homelessness, with a 55% increase in temporary accommodation in just 1 year, up to last October. The requirement to spend under 51% of the homelessness prevention grant on temporary accommodation, while obviously a step in the right direction, will mean that still more of the bill for rising homelessness costs will have to come from the general budgets, including from reserves and from other spending. Costs from special educational needs and disabilities have also been surging, with a forecast overspend of £4.6 million. But the increase in the high needs block funding has not recognised this. Across London, the upshot of this large gap between assessed need and actual funding, which the Institute for Fiscal Studies has identified as 17%, the largest shortfall of any region in England. Many outer London boroughs are amongst the lowest funded per capita in the country, despite significant pressures. We welcome the government's commitment to reviewing local government funding, because this is a huge opportunity to create a system that accurately reflects the current levels of need. In particular, we need to make sure population figures are robust, which requires serious attention to whether the figures for London reported in the last census are accurate, given many people left the capital during the pandemic and have since returned.
I fully echo his comments about funding not keeping up with demographic changes, and I think that's a cross-party criticism, not aimed just at the Labour government, because it's historical. But just to add to that for the Minister, one of the other price and funding challenges coming through has been the contract inflation and the jobs tax impact on all local councils. So for Bexley, the impact is expected to be around £5 million next year. but the amount of funding being provided by the government is only 1.6 million. So does he agree with me that the ministers need to address this issue as well as this other issue of fair funding to ensure that councils can be financially sustainable?
Calvin Bailey.
Thank the honourable member. No, and I'll allow the minister to explain to him why later. Alongside a local government funding formula that doesn't recognise London-wide changes in pressure and needs. The Tories' legacy is a division between outer London and inner London that is woefully outdated. Even 15 or 20 years ago, the traditional distinction between the core city and the outer areas made some sense. Density and deprivation were more concentrated in the centre as a legacy of slums and deindustrialisation. But the impact of affordable housing and demographic changes has long since consigned this to the past. Population, and especially people on lower incomes, have moved outwards, but the funding formula hasn't kept up. The places we live in have changed massively. Populations have grown as new people have come in, but this has pushed up rents and house prices, contributing to real social exclusion and deprivation for many. There are many statistics to illustrate this, but I will quote just two. Redbridge has more than 80,000 children and young people across the borough. Islington has less than half of that figure. But when it comes to spending on children's services, it is almost inverted, with Islington able to spend £81 million and Redbridge just £44 million. And this cannot be justified in terms of deprivation rates, because Redbridge now sits below the London average, sits above the London average, and Islington below it. And the situation is no different for public health, where outdated formulae result in Waltham Forest receiving 2.5 times less public health funding per person than Kensington and Chelsea, despite having higher levels of deprivation. We need to recognise that this isn't just about the grant formula itself, because inner London weighting has impacts across many areas of policy and therefore the quality of life of my constituents. Performance levels across education, health, crime and antisocial behaviour are becoming harder to sustain due to the recruitment and retention issues, because teachers, police officers can earn up to £6,000 more just from travelling 15 minutes on the tube. And this disparity impacts revenues as well as costs, because many inner London boroughs have a much greater ability to raise funds from business rates and charges, and this is equally something that needs to be further taken into account in the government's funding reforms. Ultimately, we need to see significant change that recognises the impact of huge demographic shifts, which impacts all of London, but we need special consideration for outer London specifically. So I welcome the steps the government have taken so far in reforming the local government financing system, including giving councils multi-year settlements, which allow them to plan more effectively. That said, local government funding reform will not, on its own, guarantee the financial sustainability of local government. And we all know the challenging financial position the government has inherited. If greater resources cannot come from national government, an alternative would be empowering local authorities to raise revenue in ways through greater fiscal devolution. The fact that 7 London boroughs now require exceptional financial support should be a wake-up call for us all. But EFS is not a solution. It is an emergency measure that does nothing to address the structural funding issues at hand. The 2 London boroughs that required EFS in 2024-25 now need even greater support in 25-26. Relying on EFS would only kick the can down the road while allowing financial instability to deepen. For my constituents, this presents a further concern, because our local councils have been managing their budgets prudently and well, dealing with the inadequacies of the funding sentiment and often having to increase council tax to do so as a result. We cannot continue to see success punished, as it was under the last government, by policies that direct funding towards life support instead of tackling the underlying drivers for increased costs that impact on well-managed and poorly managed councils alike. I urge the Government to work with the local government sector to explore alternative support mechanisms, such as long-term debt restructuring, to provide councils with the genuine route to financial stability. We look forward to the funding reforms due in the next 12 months, but we must recognise that the pressure driving costs for our councils are also linked to policies, other policies across government, from housing and planning to SEND reforms. Mrs. Lul-Buck, Your Highness, strong and empowered local government in London is vital support to support delivery of our national missions, whether we are talking about raising living standards, delivering 1.5 million new homes, getting our NHS and social system back on its feet, or creating good jobs and strong communities. It all comes back to local councils like Waltham Forest and Redbridge, delivering for local communities. And our councils, our Labour councils, can do so much more if these challenges are tackled. Our hard-working local government staff and council leaders are already innovating and delivering change despite these challenges. In Waltham Forest, the council aims to deliver 27,000 new homes and 52,000 square feet of working space. Redbridge is taking forward a new empty property strategy to tackle that element of the housing crisis, alongside plans to deliver 19,000 new homes and 7,000 new jobs over the next decade. I know that London MPs from across this House and other hard-working our hard-working councillors and council officers are keen to work in partnership with the government to address this huge challenge we're facing. I look forward to playing my part in that. Thank you.
Just about to remind members, if they wish to speak to Bob in the usual way, as you would in the chamber, we're going to need to impose a 4-minute time limit to make sure that all members get to speak. The question is that this House has considered local government finances in London. Julia Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Well, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'm very, very grateful to the Honourable Member for Leighton and Wanstead for calling what is an absolutely vital debate. It's one I tabled myself, so I'm glad that one of us got drawn in the ballot, and I think he makes a very compelling case. I'm extremely sympathetic as an outer London MP to the case he's making about the disparity between the centre of the city and its outskirts. Now, residents in Havering pay among the highest council tax in London, and in return they rightly expect robust services. They want to see their vulnerable neighbours supported, parks and streets well maintained and essential services working effectively. However, Havering has been under significant financial pressure for years. The root cause of this issue is an outdated and flawed local government funding formula that does not adequately reflect the changing needs of our borough. Havering's population has undergone significant changes in the past decade. We've seen some of the fastest increase in child numbers across the country and a growing elderly population. Both groups come with complex, multi-layered needs. These demographic shifts have driven up demand for expensive social care services. However, the funding formula still relies on outdated data, failing to reflect these changes, and it's left Havering facing growing financial strain. At the same time, if I may say, other London councils have been able to build reserves during this period, largely due to benefiting from this same outdated formula, especially when COVID grants were allocated based on it. This has created an inner and outer London disparity, with some boroughs receiving more than they need, while others, like Havering, are struggling. Now, the Department for Education uses much more up-to-date formula, and that's why Havering has received the bulk of London's capital funding for schools to meet that rising number of children. So one part of government acknowledges the change that's happening, while another is a decade out of date. Now, I've long been an advocate for reform of the London local government funding formula to reflect these demographic shifts. The previous Conservative government initiated the Fair Funding Review to address those imbalances, but progress was stalled by the pandemic. That means that much of the groundwork for reform has been done, and I urge the Minister to accelerate the review to bring about the necessary changes. In the meantime, in recent years, the Council has received some crucial uplifts in social care funding, and that's helped to ensure that vital services can continue to be delivered. But the fundamental structural issues in the funding formula still remain, and without a long-term solution, the situation will only worsen. To address this in January, I facilitated a meeting between Havering Council and the local government minister, Baroness Taylor, and I was grateful for that meeting. As a result, the government approved further exceptional financial support, and that enabled the council to set a budget for the year. It's welcome support, but it's only a temporary fix, and a lasting solution is needed. Again, that requires pushing forward with the funding formula review. On top of those fundamental issues on funding, the government has also introduced fresh financial pressures through the budget. One of the most significant changes is the increase in employer national insurance contributions. That's driven up the cost of social care and other essential services across the borough. Now, those increases are directly impacting local businesses and services, from pharmacies and GPs to critical childcare providers and high street shops. Now, just last week, I spoke to several high street businesses. They're facing huge business rates bills increases, rising parking charges and the impact of the NICS increases. They are pushing customers away from our high streets and threatening the vitality of our local economy. There will obviously be an ongoing knock-on impact on the local government funding issues. The latest local government finance settlement has provided Havering with the smallest increase in spending power since 2021, and that increase is essentially wiped out by the additional national insurance costs. On top of that, Havering has been excluded from the national £600 million recovery grant, and no non-Labour London council, apart from Tower Hamlets, will benefit from that spend in the capital. So looking forward, the council is looking at ways to get the economy growing again locally, but that's not going to deal with the fundamental issue of the funding formula, and I very much ask the Minister to accelerate that review so that our residents can benefit.
Yeah.
Sorry, folks, I've got to go. Thank you. Can I thank my honourable friend from Leighton and Wanstead for securing this debate, and what a pleasure it is to serve under your chairmanship. Local government funding has to be fair and has to reflect the needs of the boroughs. As has been spoken by the two honourable members before me, the recovery grant offers some respite, but boroughs like Redbridge, which should have, under our estimation, got £6 million, didn't get a penny from that recovery grant. Boroughs like Redbridge, despite facing significant financial constraints, still managed to punch above their weight. That does not mean they don't deserve the money. It means they deserve even more money because they're actually well-run, efficient, effective councils. If you look at Redbridge, children's services are outstanding for the second time in a row. Adult social care is excellent. They have weekly bin collections, built 2 new leisure centres, a new Lido, a climbing centre is on its way. You may think that they're rolling in money. You couldn't be much wronger. Because they're well-run, effective council, it's the 11th most deprived borough in London. And if you look at the core spending power, they get £904 per person. Extrapolate that over the population, that's about £73 million less per year that council receives than what it should do. And they didn't receive the recovery fund. That's a lot of money. We've heard the arguments between inner and outer London. Yes, inner London has the ability to generate funds. And of course, less ability for the outer London councils to raise the cash. So how is that equalised? It's equalised by residents from outer London having to therefore pay higher council tax to make up for the services that the residents deserve. No one can tell me that residents in outer London deserve less money per head than people in inner London. We've heard about housing, how housing is one of the biggest decimators of finances at the moment. Homelessness is rife all over, and it's exacerbated by the fact that more expensive inner London areas can buy up housing in outer London areas like Redbridge like Waltham Forest, like Havering, and therefore, when I have my weekly surgeries as an MP, a lot of my cases is dealing with inner London councils, with people being housed in outer London boroughs. So I think the three key asks, Madam Chairman, is that central government needs to use an updated, accurate data, such as the ONS statistics on employment, on income, on homelessness, and therefore outer London boroughs can be more fairly served. We need to reform the funding formula so that updated deprivation data and demands on services, particularly housing needs, is taken into account. And of course, we need to use the census data.
Limits up, sorry. Going to have to reduce time now to 3.5 minutes. Peter Fortune.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Before serving the people of Bromley and Biggin Hill as their Member of Parliament, I served them as a councillor in the borough for 12 years. I was also privileged to be deputy leader of that great borough. Therefore, I am long familiar with the financial challenges facing local government. As much as the Labour Party would like to pin the blame solely on decisions taken in 2010, the story is far longer than that. For Bromley, the story of underfunding starts in 1997, under the last Labour government. Bromley Council's net budget has reduced by more than a quarter in real terms, and nearly 2/5 per person. Now, it is true that the previous Conservative government asked councils to make significant savings to tackle the country's deficit, but ultimately, without these difficult decisions, our nation wouldn't have been able to weather the financial storm caused by the coronavirus. I regret that the previous Conservative government didn't deliver a long-promised fair funding review, but I recognise that this was hard to review and to achieve in the aftermath of the pandemic, the energy crisis and high inflation. But again, this is a problem successive governments of all stripes have failed to grasp. The new Labour government's actions have made it even more challenging for councils. In fact, it's the same old Labour story in London. More money is spent on Labour areas and less on the Conservative suburbs. Bromley Council was awarded the second lowest funding settlement amount per person. If Bromley received the average settlement grant funding per person for London, the borough would receive an additional £80 million a year. £80 million. In addition to inadequate settlement, Bromley did not benefit from the recovery grant. With inflation rising fast again under this Labour government, the funding pressures will worsen, further eroding councils' financial standing. Nor have councils received adequate funding to cover the cost of Labour's decision to increase employers' national insurance contributions. This jobs tax will further push up costs, especially in social care. Now, Bromley is a well-managed borough, and I commend the Conservative leader, Councillor Colin Smith, and his excellent team. But like all London councils, Bromley faces enormous pressures that are simply unaffordable. We retain the fourth lowest level of council tax in Outer London because we are a low-cost borough. Bromley Council has saved over £150 million since 2011. But being a low-tax, low-cost borough means there are few remaining savings. It's become increasingly impossible for councils to balance the books. Bromley can this year, but only thanks to the authority's carefully built and protected reserves, built over many years of sensible and responsible stewardship, and despite opposition calls to reduce them. But in the long term, this isn't sustainable. It's why a quarter of London boroughs have already effectively declared bankruptcy and requested exceptional financial support. Future local government settlements must adequately fund councils to deliver, especially considering rising national insurance costs. This should reflect the higher London costs that all boroughs face, fixing the area cost adjustments, which wrongly say Bromley is one of the most affordable places in London. There should also be a mechanism to reward low-cost and efficient authorities instead of asking them to make savings, while spendthrift authorities are given more. Finally, the government should allow councils to change statutory charges to match costs, reduce ring-fencing to allow councils to be more flexible, and to allow them to be concerned with their own priorities. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Natasha Irons.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Councils are at the coalface of politics and leaders in delivery. From potholes to parks and parking, local councils deliver the things that we care about. For too long, our councils have been failed by central government. They have been undervalued and underfunded. And in London, where councils are receiving 28% less percent funding per Londoner than they did in 2010, boroughs are now at crisis point. London's housing emergency has pushed an estimated 1 in 50 Londoners to homelessness and pushed London councils to spending £4 million per day on temporary accommodation.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Barnet Council processes 10 homeless applications every single day now, more than double the amount that it was processing just 2 years ago. This, coupled with additional spending on educational needs and on adult social care, is crippling councils' budgets as much as council leaders will try to do the best they can by their local communities. Does my honourable friend agree that this must change if we are to see a sustainable future for councils in Outer London?
Natasha Irons.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and of course I agree it's absolutely imperative that we solve this crisis. With overspend in children's and social care across London, 7 London boroughs require exceptional financial support to balance their books, and Croydon Council is one of them. Like councils across the country, poor decisions and failure in governance mixed with chronic underfunding saw this council issue its first Section 114 notice in 2020. As an outer London borough with inner London problems, Croydon has historically suffered from a financial settlement that didn't reflect the demands on its service. And as the debt built up over successive administrations, now costs the council £71 million per year to service, of which they borrow £38 million from government to cover. And whilst I appreciate that this is not something that the government can just wipe off, I urge them to work with Croydon Council to restructure this debt and find a long-term solution to bring down the cost on its day-to-day spending. However, debt is not Croydon Council's only challenge, because even if this debt was wiped out, it is now in the position where it would still need to borrow an extra £65 million from government to balance its books. And whilst there are overspend in the areas that we would expect, like children's and adult social care, the council is also grappling with a number of neighbouring boroughs placing vulnerable people in temporary accommodation in Croydon whilst not funding the ongoing associated costs. A massive 24% of people in temporary accommodation in Croydon have been placed there from outside of the borough, with the highest number of placements coming from Lambeth, Lewisham and Bromley. With families often stuck in temporary accommodation for many months or even years, it then falls to Croydon to pick up the further ongoing costs with demand-led services. And with councils across London bidding for accommodation and social care placements in Croydon, the council is often forced into a bidding war to provide support for its own residents. So, Madam Chairperson, I not only ask the government to look at funding London councils properly and introduce measures such as including deprivation in the local government funding formula, or increasing local housing allowance in line with inflation, and removing the cap on how much councils can reclaim to cover the costs of temporary accommodation. I ask the government to consider ways to reduce profiteering within the marketplace for demand-led services, to consider legislating to ensure a home council continues to fund the costs of care when children are placed outside of their home borough, and to ensure that a Families Homes Council continues to fund the cost of placing homeless families outside of the host borough. Because, Madam Chairperson, no one wins when councils are forced to be pitted against one another. And if we want people to feel and see the change that they voted for on their streets, in their communities and across this country, it is properly funded councils that can deliver it. If we want the services that communities rely on every day to be of the highest quality, then it is properly funded councils that can make that happen. And if we want to make it feel as if the lights have finally come on in this country, then it is properly funded councils that can flip the switch. Thank you.
Andrew Rossendale.
Thank you, Mrs Lilbuck, and thank you for calling me to speak. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I thank the Honourable Member for Leighton and Wanstead for rightly raising this debate today. I'm very grateful to him, as I'm sure we all are. And I'd like to endorse the comments of pretty much all members that have spoken today, especially my colleague from Hornchurch and Upminster. We share the same borough of Havering, and other members have really highlighted what we all know, which this system of local government funding is fundamentally broken. No matter what borough we come from, the current system simply isn't working. We're all suffering from local services that are inadequate, funding that isn't there for things that are absolutely essential. We're seeing money spent on things that I believe in local government are wasted. And we, particularly in Havering, and I feel that Bromley and maybe my honourable friend from Hillingdon will also say that our boroughs are spending a lot of money funding the Greater London Authority, most of which seems to be spent in the inner London areas. So the outer London areas are funding inner London. We've been doing that for many decades, not just since the Greater London Authority and the Mayor was created, but over both governments. And I'd like to depoliticise this a bit, because we can blame each other. We can blame each other. You can blame each other. The last government didn't deal with it. This government, I hope, will attempt to deal with it. But without fundamental change, this problem will go on and on. What we actually need is less government, but more effective government. We need spending on the right things, and we need control back to our local areas and less control by central government and by the Greater London Authority. Now, Havering, as my honourable friend for Hornchurch and Upminster has rightly pointed out, I won't repeat all the arguments because she's absolutely correct on all the points she's made. We have particularly suffered from underfunding and an unfair funding formula for many decades. In fact, all the way back to when the London boroughs were created in the 60s. In the 1960s, the London boroughs were created, and clearly what happened is that the outer London areas, considered to be wealthier, were effectively putting money into the centre for many, many decades. Now, as members have rightly commented, that's changed. The Honourable Member for Leighton Wanstead made this point, that outer London areas have altered, the demographics have changed, but the funding formula remains the same. So we do need, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, a complete change to how we deal with this. Fiddling around with the figures of the edges isn't going to solve it. We need root and branch reform of how local government operates in the Greater London area. We need more flexibility in areas like Havering, which are not really in London. We orbit London. We're far more linked to Essex areas than when we are to inner London. But it needs a fundamental reform of the whole system. But I once again make the point that outer London has always been poorly funded and unfairly treated. Havering, particularly with a very high older population, a very high younger population, change of demographics, we particularly need more support, and I hope the Minister today will pledge that support, because on behalf of all of our constituents, we need change.
Order. Daniel Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Lord. It's a pleasure to serve on the chairship, but at the outset, I need to say that my wife is an employee as a Senko in the London Borough of Bexley, where I'm a Member of Parliament. I was a councillor in Bexley for 20 years, including 10 years at the end of the last Labour government. So I do hear what the member for Bromley and Biggin Hill says, but we were in a very different funding arrangement then, I can assure you, where my local authority wasn't in the position it now is. And it's the member for, my neighbouring member for Old Bexley and Sidcup has now left, but clearly he was on the council as deputy leader of the council when I was leader of the opposition, when we faced our funding crisis back in 2021, and that funding crisis continues to this day. In our council, reserves have been used to balance the budget for years, including the £5 million we needed to use to balance the budget in the 2018 council election year. And things became worse in 2021 when the council applied for its capitalisation order, when it made 15% of our staff redundant and had to sell a building for £9 million in order to be able to fund the redundancy costs for those staff. And in that period from 2010 to 2015, Bexley has risen from the 10th most expensive council for council tax in London to the 8th most expensive council. But at my election speech last year, I pledged to work tirelessly with my Conservative Control Authority to deliver for local people and businesses. And today, on their behalf, I am here to make some key pledges about the pressures they face and pressures we've heard today. So firstly, like my honourable friend from Ilford South has said, we face those positions with the fair funding settlement, those issues with demographic changes in outer London from inner London, which means the borough that I was first elected to represent on the council 25 years ago is a very different borough to the borough today, particularly in parts of my constituency, in Slade Green, Northumberland Heath, demographically and in terms of poverty, are very different to what they were then. So I know my council's position is that council tax shouldn't be a primary driver of increased core spending power, and that we should simplify the assessments and reduce the number of relative needs formula. Then there's the public health grant. I've sat there through budget after budget as either leader of the opposition or the opposition finance spokesperson, listening to my Conservative leader, Baroness O'Neill, saying that the public health grant is the second lowest for Bexley in London. And I'm pleased, in fact, I'm proud that under a Labour government, Bexley this year has had the 6th highest public health increase of all the boroughs, but clearly that position remains, that our public health grant remains too low. As I've said, our finances remain in a very difficult position, a £32 million budget gap next year, which needs to be addressed, but most worryingly remains the position with our safety valve agreement. Our safety valve agreement was signed because of the significant overspends in special educational needs, but that will expire next year. We are not currently on course to achieve the requirements within the safety valve agreement and the statutory override. There is a potential 12.8 million at risk, and clearly, as I've continually said to this government, we do need to resolve that to protect some of our most vulnerable children in next year's budget, but also residents and businesses across the London Borough of Bexley. Thank you, Chair.
Helen Hayes.
Thank you, Mrs Gilbuck. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair today, and I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Leighton and Wanstead, on securing this important debate. I was a councillor in Southwark for 6 years before I was elected to this place. It is a privilege to serve in local government. Our councils carry the very heavy responsibility of delivering local services across a huge range of areas, and they have a unique opportunity to make a real difference in the lives of local residents, delivering vital protections for vulnerable people, as well as the services that all of us rely on. I'd like to pay particular tribute to the work that my local councils, Lambeth and Southwark, did during the COVID-19 pandemic and over the last few years, supporting residents with the cost of living crisis. I was elected in 2010 to my local council on the same day that the Tory Lib Dem coalition government took power in Westminster. And I remember the first meeting of our council when we were briefed on the council's financial settlement from central government at the start of a period of austerity. I remember the shock that descended in the room at the scale of the cuts to our budget, and as the understanding of the impact on local services became clear. But I have to say, we had no idea what was yet to come. For 14 years, the Conservative government outsourced both the pain and the blame for their austerity programme onto our local councils, cutting well over 50% of the local government grant, slashing the affordable housing grant, freezing council rents, reducing investment in the existing council housing stock, freezing the local housing allowance, driving up homelessness. And on SEND, an area where I take a particular interest as chair of the Education Select Committee, the coalition placed almost all of the statutory responsibility for delivering services onto councils, but took away the ability to deliver new school places directly, driving up home-to-school transport costs and the cost of purchasing places in the independent sector. There won't be a member here today who doesn't see the impact of the housing crisis and the crisis of temporary accommodation on our constituents and on our local authorities, the shortage of homes driving more and more residents to seek support from their council and putting more and more residents into the worst possible quality accommodation with destabilising effects on families across our city. The Liz Truss mini-budget had a devastating impact on the ability of our councils to build new homes. Both of my boroughs have very ambitious programmes for delivering new homes, but they have had to mothball sites as the cost of materials and labour has been sent spiralling. So on all of these issues and many more, London councils face a perfect storm in their finances, and we urgently need support from the government. So as I finish, Mrs Lewell-Buck, just 5 very quick measures that the government should turn its attention to: raising the local council housing allowance to stabilise housing in London, ensuring immediate investment in small sites owned by councils and housing associations which already have planning consent and can be delivered, addressing the statutory override. There isn't sufficient engagement with councils on what the government plans as they begin to plan for the next financial year, getting housing revenue accounts back onto a sustainable footing and delivering multi-year settlements to give certainty certainty and stability to our councils for the future. I know that our councils have the commitment and determination to keep delivering for our residents, and I urge the government urgently to support them to do so.
Bambos Charalambos.
Thank you, Ms Lord-Buck. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair. And I also want to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Leighton and Wanstead, on securing this very important, vital debate and on making such an excellent speech. As the member for Southgate and Wood Green, I have the privilege of representing two boroughs, the boroughs of Enfield and Haringey. And both Enfield and Haringey have faced enormous pressures on their budgets since 2010, when we first had the iteration of the then government's austerity agenda, when funding to local councils was drastically slashed and London councils were particularly badly affected. Since 2010, Enfield had a £200 million amount, or 42%, slashed from its budget, with the Institute for Financial Studies estimating that Enfield's share of current local authority funding is the fourth worst in the country relative to comparative need, to the tune of £90 million per year. Enfield, like many other outer London boroughs, as has been mentioned in this debate already, suffers from damping, which is where the government assesses what the need is for outer London boroughs, calculates that need, but then takes away a proportion of that amount and distributes it elsewhere. This is just plain wrong, and Enfield needs to get the amount of funding it actually needs for Enfield citizens to provide for Enfield to provide the services it needs to its residents. Enfield has lost 11.6 million year on year since 2012-13 as a result of the recalculation for outer London that it has. Turning now to Haringey. Haringey has also seen a cut to its budget in real terms since 2011. That cut was 143 million in its revenue funding. It's also seen a 30% cut in its workforce since 2011 and faces huge pressures on its budgets, particularly in areas of adult social care, in which costs rose by 31 million, and in children's social care and in SEND, where the costs have risen to 6.6 million over the same period. My honourable friend, the member for Leighton and Wanstead, has already made the point about the antiquated inner-outer London funding formula, which adversely affects both Enfield and Haringey, but in relation to this debate, it's very clear that it also affects many other outer London boroughs. This outdated inner-outer London definition needs to be scrapped. Other colleagues have already made the point about the huge pressures faced by London local authorities in relation to temporary accommodation. Last year, Enfield faced a £17.3 million overspend on temporary accommodation. And for Haringey, that figure over the last 2 years was 13 million. Despite this, councils still provide excellent services, and I'm very proud to put on record the great work that Haringey Learning Partnership does in relation to that, to its circumstances. So what needs to be done? So the inner-outer London formula needs to be scrapped. We need to double the homelessness prevention grant. We need to introduce a funding formula that represents the need for deprivation, and we need to make sure that reform is put in place in relation to capital flexibility. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Rachel Blake.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's an honour to serve under your chairship. And can I thank my honourable friend from Leighton and Wanstead for securing this really important debate. And can I also, last but not least, thank our friends and colleagues from the London local government family who are here listening to this debate. Their tireless work, day in, day out, is not unappreciated, and we're really happy to see you here today. It has been good to listen to the cross-party support for this debate, but I was a little disappointed to not hear a bit more reflection, shall we say, from members opposite about how we got here, despite having much shared experience as local representatives. Slashing of housing investment by the previous Conservative government, slashing of genuinely affordable homes by the previous Conservative mayor, where is he now? And let's not forget the failed fair funding review that my honourable friend from Biggin Hill reference that hung over local government for years, meaning that there could be no meaningful planning. In the last 14 years, we saw a 173% increase in rough sleeping, 69% increase in temporary accommodation. It's shameful to read this out. Rising rents and falling investment. And let's not forget the cause of this lies firmly with the Conservatives. And my good honourable friend from Bromley and Biggin Hill tempts me to remind us about what happened in 1997 when we halved temporary accommodation, record investment into the condition of homes through the Decent Homes programme, and the historic 2008-11 programme in new genuinely affordable homes benefiting many families now. But let's come to the matter. No, I won't give away. Let's come to the matter in hand. I'd like to talk about temporary accommodation costs, special educational needs, and the specific challenges of managing London's visitor economy in the very centre of London. I will give way.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. On the specific challenges for central London, would she agree with me that Westminster Council are making the right decision to make use of the new council tax powers to implement a premium for second homeowners? And would she join me in encouraging Kensington and Chelsea Council to take a look at doing that, which could raise 11 million a year and is currently not the council's position?
Rachel Blake.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd be delighted to celebrate the work that Westminster City Council does in terms of tackling the challenges that we face as a visitor economy. And I'm not sure how much Kensington and Chelsea Council would appreciate me joining your campaign, but I certainly will, because I think it is for the best for the very centre of London. Last year, Westminster City Council spent £95 million on temporary accommodation. City of London's temporary accommodation costs last year went up 52% to £1.1 million. I'm very proud of the investment that Westminster City Council is choosing to put into in-source temporary accommodation. They're real pioneers in this, but we're doing it against a very, very challenging environment in terms of overall costs. And I admit the challenges that my outer London colleagues face in terms of the number of families that are moving to that area. We very much want those families to be staying in the centre of London, and I hope that some of the solutions we'll be putting forward will make sure that that will happen. In terms of special educational needs, the number of special educational needs on education and health plans has increased by 37% from 2018 to 2024, from 1,035 to 1,413. Each and every single one of those children and families deserves not to have to go through such a difficult approach to securing a special educational needs plan, but also deserves to have the security and certainty that their education will continue to be invested into the future. And onto the specific challenges of the very centre of London. We have higher additional street cleaning costs, and Westminster has just invested £2 million into tackling the additional antisocial behaviour that we face in the very centre of London. So what can we do about it? The government's made great progress. £2 billion today in new genuinely affordable homes, 18,000 new genuinely affordable homes. Core spending power up by 5.3%, and multi-year settlements that we all know will make such a big difference. But I do think that we can go further. Let's bring forward the short-term lets registration scheme, and let's pilot it in the cities of London and Westminster. Let's review the formula so that it doesn't have to be uncertain and complex, and let's tackle temporary accommodation crisis for good. Imagine what that would do to those families. Imagine what that would do to life chances, and imagine what it would do to public finances when we're not pouring money into a poor quality private rented sector and building the genuinely affordable homes that our country and our city needs.
With a time limit of 2 minutes, Danny Beales.
Last but not least, I'll be. Thank you, Mrs. Lilbuck. It's a pleasure. Well, less of a pleasure now, but it was a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd echo the points that my colleagues have made about the unprecedented financial pressures in London councils. Very briefly, I'll just mention specifically, as well as the need to tackle temporary accommodation, the SEN crisis, and much more which is true in Hillingdon as it is in any other borough. I think we also need to ensure there's the very best governance and financial governance for local authorities. In Hillingdon, unfortunately, on top of those long-term pressures, we have seen short-termism and we have seen poor governance. A salami-slice approach to budgeting, each year taking off an extra %, not transforming services for the long term. not building the financial base of the council long term, have all come home to roost with the financial crisis the council is now in. We've seen if you don't invest in new homes, you get temporary accommodation pressures. If you don't invest in early years services and youth services and close them instead, you get more pressures later in the education system. And that is what has happened in Hillingdon. We have the lowest levels of reserves compared to the nearest neighbours. CITFRA reported we ran them down from 62 million in 2021 to 20 million in 2025. And that is, I will definitely give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. In Barnet, we have around 85 care homes, and yet in inner London, in boroughs like Camden and Islington, they have around 20. Yet the grant that inner London boroughs receive is around 3 million, and yet Barnet Council and other outer London boroughs only get around 2 million. Does my honourable friend think that that injustice in the funding formula is also causing issues for councils like the one that he represents?
Annie Beales.
Thank you very much. I do think we have to consider the cost that outer London boroughs faces, and London more generally. And I think, as has been said excellently by the member leading the debate, London is special, it is different, it does face extra costs and extra pressures, and that's right across London. Hillingdon's own financial officer this very year wrote a damning cover report to their budget, laying clear that the road is fast running out. They pointed to governance issues within the council and ability to meet its own less ambitious savings targets in previous years compared to the future projected targets. And my constituents, to be frank, have paid the price for this mismanagement. They're paying more, substantially more, every single year. Fees and charges going up exponentially and getting less services as a result. I welcome the calls for long-term extra financial support for local government. That is much needed. But we do have to ensure as a government that when we hopefully agree this extra long-term financial settlement, that governance improvements are in place, that this money is again not used to short-term fix the cracks, but fundamentally transform services, to transform the SEND system, to transform the housing system, the social care system, and many others, which in some authorities has not happened when times were slightly easier than they are today. Just to sum up and echo my colleagues' points today, London councils are financially on their knees, and it is vital that we intervene as a government, because ultimately local government is key. It's everyone's front door to government and their community. We need to invest, we need long-term reform of services, of our education system and housing system to provide the mixed, successful and financially sustainable communities we all want to see. Thank you.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you, Mrs Lord-Buck. It is a pleasure to serve under your benevolent gaze. And may I thank the honourable member for Leighton and Wanstead for securing this important debate. I point to my register of interest, which shows that I still proudly serve as a councillor in my constituency in Sutton Borough. London is facing a crisis in council funding unparalleled in living memory. We have a funding system that has been starved for years under previous Conservative governments. As a result, our councils are now struggling to meet the growing demands of the communities they serve. This is not an exaggeration. This is an emergency. Since the onset of austerity in 2010, per capita government funding has been reduced by more than a fifth, with boroughs now receiving 28% less funding per resident. Meanwhile, London's population has skyrocketed, increasing by over 900,000 in the last 15 years. The city's councils are crying out for a long-term funding solution. Local government provides the critical frontline services to our society. It's where people turn to for help, meet their daily needs, and how communities are supported. And let's be clear, many councils who put in considerable effort to balance the books are not at fault here. They're simply not given enough financial support in the first place as statutory demands rise. Frankly, it makes a mockery of our conversations about policy here in Westminster, when people's bins go uncollected and children are left waiting for their EHCPs. Our attention should be focused on helping local governments at the front line of the state to deliver the basics. Outer London boroughs like Sutton, Kingston and Richmond are getting a raw deal on government funding. In fact, some of the worst in the country. We see it with police abstractions and we see it in financial council funding. I will.
So the honourable member mentions that they're getting a raw deal in Sutton. I'm quite sure they are. Does he think that the people of Sutton are getting good value for money with the precept that we're paying to the Mayor and the Greater London Authority, or would you like some of that money put back into the local communities that he serves?
Luke Taylor.
I thank the Honourable Member for his intervention. Sutton has one of the lowest spends by TfL per constituent, per resident of any of the London boroughs. We have no tubes, no overground and half a tram stop at the very, very north part of the borough, which shows how poorly we are served by TfL infrastructure, and I do agree with his point. Outer London is being left behind with some of the lowest support per capita. Our broken system means Inner London continues to be prioritised despite the shifting needs across the city. There is a growing mismatch between funding allocations and local need, worsened by funding formula that hasn't been updated since 2013. The data on which these allocations are based, population demographics and deprivation levels, are outdated and no longer reflect the reality on the ground. Research from the IFS in 2022 found a 17% gap between funding need and actual funding across London, the largest gap of any region in England. And there is a temptation among many, let's face it, we've all heard it, to paint London as a city where the streets are paved with gold and the challenges of poverty are less intense. And that's nonsense. London has the second highest poverty rate in the country, second only to the West Midlands. It has infrastructure problems, growing homelessness, and millions of people suffering with the ever-rising cost of living, which is particularly pronounced in the context of London's overheated property market. And the problem is diffuse, not concentrated in Inner London. Indeed, poverty is shifting across London in ways we haven't seen before, as working patterns change and as jobs and industries ebb and flow. The outdated funding model forces outer London boroughs to tackle what are often characterised as Inner London problems with far less support. The Minister must reassess this funding formula to ensure a fairer deal for boroughs like Sutton. It's time to recognise the significant demographic and social changes that have taken place in London over the last 12 years. Take the homelessness crisis as an example of how poverty is shifting across London in unprecedented ways. Homelessness in my home borough of Sutton increased by 51% between 2018 and 2023. London is at the epicentre of the UK's homelessness disaster with the highest levels in the country. London councils estimate that 1 in 50 Londoners are currently homeless, living in temporary accommodation. In Sutton, every night, 1,200 families are housed at the cost of the council. Nearly 90,000 children in the capital are homeless. That's 1 in every 21 children in London. Or to put it very clearly, that is at least 1 homeless child in every classroom. As a Liberal Democrat MP for Sutton and Cheam, I'm proud to live in a borough that is committed to housing the homeless where we can. But for the sake of such boroughs who hold that commitment, it is essential we address the gaps in support and provide long-term solutions to end homelessness for good. The financial strain currently put upon councils to fight this crisis is utterly unsustainable. Boroughs are spending £4 million every single day on temporary accommodation, and those costs have shot up by 68% in just 1 year. If these trends continue, homelessness will bankrupt our boroughs, and I fear we will plunge our city back into the dark days of Victorian poverty and inequality. Municipal government will wither away, and the fingertips of the state will succumb to a kind of financial frostbite, meaning we will be no longer able to reach out and rescue families from homelessness and communities from disintegration. Our city will be a plaything of the rich and famous, no longer a home, but a cold shell. And be under no illusion, this is what is at stake. We are already seeing councils needing exceptional financial support just to survive. The housing revenue account is under unprecedented pressure. And with cuts to resources, capped social rents, rising inflation and ageing housing stock, London boroughs are being forced to cut £260 million over the next 4 years, making it harder to build new homes or to maintain the ones we already have. So we on the Liberal Democrat benches urge the government to urgently publish a cross-Whitehall plan to end all forms of homelessness, to exempt groups of homeless people and those at risk of homelessness from the shared accommodation rate, to ring-fence emergency funding for local councils for permanent accommodation of rough sleepers, to increase the local housing allowance rates in line with inflation and ensure sufficient financial resources for local authorities to deliver the Homelessness Reduction Act. Because if we don't, I fear the consequences for the future livability of our city will be existential. Thank you.
Opposition spokesperson David Simmons.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs Lilbuck. It's a pleasure to serve once again under your chairmanship. And I'd add my thanks and congratulations to the member for Leighton and Wanstead for securing, with that cross-party support, what's been a very wide-ranging debate. But I think my starting point, having served 12 years as a London councillor under the last Labour government, and then 12 years as a London councillor under the previous Coalition and Conservative government, is that he should be careful what he wishes for when he brings forward a debate on this subject. We can already see a pattern that is beginning to reassert itself in the finances of our local authorities in London and in local government generally, whereby what sound like significant increases are announced, but then whilst one hand gives, the other takes away. Such extra funding as has been announced is for the most part comprised of maximum possible rises in council tax, very large increases in business rates, and an assumption that local authorities will raise the maximum possible fees and charges from their residents, which figure is then deducted from any central government support. And we can see the imposition of that in decisions large and small. On the smaller side, we've had representations from London councils about the impact of the ring fencing of grant funding around homelessness, reducing the freedom and flexibility of local authorities in the capital to deploy those resources to keep people off the streets. But at a much more macro scale, the national insurance contributions rise, which, after additional government support, leaves local authorities in England more than £1 billion worse off net than they were before that budget was announced. So many of us will have served through many years where there were announcements of the single regeneration budget, significant rises in things like the dedicated schools grant established for the first time under the last Labour government. But as many members who experienced that will know, that approach of starting with a standard spending assessment, then damping any rise that would give rise to, especially impacting on outer London boroughs with a very significant level of social need, has had a significant long-term impact. And if there is an apology to be made from this side about our approach to finances in local government, it is that we did not go as far as we would have wished to, as the member for Hornchurch and Upminster set out, in redressing some of these imbalances. The very first council meeting I ever attended as a member of public was the last one at which a Labour council ever set a budget in Hillingdon. An 18% council tax rise hitting local residents, £40 million, then around 10% of the council's budget in unspecified savings. So let us not succumb to any fiction that somehow we are entering a gilded age for the local authorities of our capital city. And of course, it comes at a time when we know that the pressures on local authorities are rising sharply. According to the charity St Mungo's, a 29% increase in rough sleeping in the capital compared to the equivalent period under the last Conservative government. The huge impact on our economy, not just of those business rate rises, but of the loss of confidence, the lack of investment. And whilst many members have spoken eloquently about the pressures around homelessness, the shortage of housing, we have all been ambitious about that, but it is very striking if we look simply at the numbers. The serving Mayor, Sir Sadiq, was set a target by the last government of around 100,000 new homes, new affordable homes, I should say. He set himself a target of 52,000, around half of what central government said he should be able to deliver. He actually delivered 35,000 new affordable homes. And in total, in equivalent periods, the current mayor has delivered 65,000 affordable new homes compared to 90,000 under his Conservative predecessor. So whilst we all share the ambition, we need the shared starting point as well of recognising that the challenges, including the impact of things like damping, the outer London inequality, those have existed in our funding formula for a very long time, and they are part of a very complex period of interactions that not just arise from the current Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, but also the Department for Education, the Department for Health and Social Care, the Department for Transport, the Home Office. If we look at London local authorities, we see many of those councils supporting significant numbers of asylum seekers. Hillingdon has the highest number of asylum seekers per capita of any local authority in the whole country, a cost not funded at all currently by central government, but contributing very significantly to the numbers of people needing to be housed and children to be cared for. So that complex picture, Ms Lilbuck, needs to be taken into account when we debate this issue. So I have some asks and some requests to put to the Minister. And again, like others, I thank London councils for the excellent work that's been put in, not just to consider what is the big picture of the quantum of financing, but also what are the things that could be done, like removing some of the ring fences that the government has imposed in the way that those resources are deployed. The first ask is that, as the government proceeds with its processes on devolution, that we look at a true shared decision-making arrangement. There is a risk that the devolution settlement leaves London the only major devolved area with no formal agreement between the Mayor and the London boroughs on shared decision-making, and we see much of that tension around housing. I'd like to ask the government once again to look at a process which has been worked on in the past around fairer funding, to begin to address the inner-outer London inequality of funding. Now, we know that the origins of that lie in assumptions that are made about deprivation, but it manifests itself in almost every area of local government finance in London. And we see still very, very large amounts relatively of grant going into inner London local authorities with low-level council tax that are also often the ones most able to raise revenue in other ways. And if we compare, for example, parking revenue accounts, London Borough of Bexley raises £6 million a year, Hillingdon £3.8 million a year, all of which can contribute to a limited extent to things like environmental and road improvements. The London Borough of Westminster, £70 million a year, a net contribution of over £40 million just for environmental projects alone. So the capacity of local authorities in London to raise revenue is hugely variable, not just the costs imposed by the demographics, and we need to make sure that we take that fully into account. I'd like to ask the Minister, and I know this is something he's been asked on the floor of the House as well, to reconsider the position around national insurance contributions. We've just had an emergency budget. We've been through a period of 6 months where it's become clear that the sums do not add up. But the impact driving up the cost of children's and adult social care, as well as every other part of public service in the capital, has been absolutely enormous. And we have had representations from every single London borough about the impact of that. There were promises made that that would be mitigated, and we need to see those promises coming forward into fulfilment. But let me finish, Mrs. Lewis-Buck, with an important point. It seems to me that all of the members here on a cross-party basis have done their best to speak up from east to west, from inner to outer, for the interests of residents in the capital. We know that those challenges are going to be significant. I have to say gently to my neighbour from Uxbridge and South Ruislip, the rises in charges are 5%, not exponential, but nonetheless after a period when many local authorities have been able to... Of course, my pleasure.
Would my honourable friend welcome the significant uplift in public health funding from this government, third more from homelessness funding, significant additional uplift in local government funding, 1 million more for potholes, one of the biggest levels in London. I could go on. Significant increase compared to the last government of which he was part. At the same time, our council is significantly, for many people, increasing council tax, introducing a garden tax and significant increases in fees and charges and cutting council tax support to many. Does he agree that that's an acceptable record?
David Simmons.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy. I think I'm probably going to avoid descending too much into parochial politics, but it's important to recognise the garden tax, which I'll have to pay. I don't know whether he will, because I live in the London Borough of Hillingdon. But all of our local authorities are facing elements of these challenges and are addressing those as best they can. It is the case that London local authorities have demonstrated probably the greatest financial resilience of any group of local authorities in the country. We've seen a considerable increase in balances held by local authorities across the capital. But what that masks is that there are significant variations, and in particular, in outer London, those pressures, partly because of the significant numbers of unfunded costs around things like asylum, the longer-term impact with the rise that's happened very quickly, very rapidly in rough sleeping. All of those are creating very significant financial pressures, set alongside the fact that the long-standing structural underfunding leaves them less able to deal with the impact of a massive increase in national insurance contributions, set aside the devastating impact of the budget on the local economy and its ability to pay the taxes, all of which support those local services. So let's take all those things into account. Let's come out of this with a new funding settlement for London. And I ask the Minister to give us an undertaking that this will not be one of those settlements where a government simply gives with one hand and takes with the other.
before I call the Minister, just a reminder, it would be very decent of him if he would leave 2 minutes at the end for the member leading the debate to wind up. Minister.
Thank you, Mrs Lulbuck. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair and to speak for the government at this debate today. And I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Leighton and Wanstead, for securing this debate, and all the interest from colleagues, I think, shows how important it was. I think he made a very, very thoughtful case on behalf of his community, on behalf of his local authority, but also on behalf of everybody living across the capital. And those themes that he pulled out, homelessness, the importance of exceptional financial support in some areas, and the long-standing issues with the formula, I think were very important ones, and ones that I'll reflect on perhaps as the structure for my own speech and cover some of the colleague contributions along the way, notwithstanding the time I must leave him at the end. And it has felt at some points like it's been a bit of a recovering councillors convention, of which I will add myself to that number. But I do know, and we all know, that actually it is so important for local authorities to have their local members of Parliament go and raise their issues in Parliament. And you'd think it'd be axiomatic that we would do so, but there might be a temptation sometimes to finish your time in local government and think maybe you want to do other things. It's really important that we advocate on behalf of our local authorities, and I think that's been done excellently by colleagues across this place. And I think we should hold at the start of this that common understanding that I think that's been expressed by colleagues, that just how good a job councillors and officers are doing across this city to keep vital public services running. So I want to add my thanks to them for their dedication and incredible work in the 800 plus different ways in which they touch local people and their lives every day. And again, as always, I think one of the differences between my previous political life and my political life now, there's so much interest put into what we do in this place, and never, seemingly enough, I think, into what goes on in local government. And actually, those are very much fundamental and can be more fundamental to individuals' daily lives. I wanted to start at the top with just some context around the financial settlement. Because this does start, and has been throughout the debate, starts with a conversation on money. And the settlement for this year makes available a total core spending power for London, including the GLA, of up to £11.35 billion. And that is a £726 million increase, Mrs Lulbuck, on last year, and represents a 5.8 cash terms increase. And that is a start on fixing the foundations of local government and providing significant investment to get to all those services and places that need the most. I think my honourable friend, the member for Dulwich and West Norwood, set out, and it was a very common experience for me in local government at that time as well, how eloquently just how hard the challenges were in the previous decade and how hard those decisions that have been made were. And there was no single budget, there's no single intervention that can reverse the damage and the harm done there. But this was our start in this place, and I'm very pleased to have that underway. Now, the honourable gentleman mentions the importance of homelessness and rough sleep, and I thought my honourable friend, the member for Croydon East, made some very thoughtful points on this too. And we are very well aware of the particular issues that are facing councils here in London. And we know that that is a symptom and an aspect of a homelessness crisis across the country, but that London is particularly affected for very obvious reasons. And this is a national disgrace that I think we should be angry about. Those sharp increases in rough sleeping, families stuck in temporary accommodation, perhaps not as visible, but just as pernicious, and children growing up without a stable place to call home. Again, points made by my honourable friend, the member for two cities of London and Westminster. And that's why we've taken the action that we have, Mrs Lulbuck, by getting £233 million to councils directly for homelessness, including the largest ever investment in prevention services, enabling councils to intervene earlier with targeted support, and that the available money for that will be nearly £1 billion. And we have focused, because it is an emergency, on getting money out the door, but there will be long-term fixes, and colleagues have talked about ways in which that might happen. And I would point them towards the long-term housing strategy, which I think will be a huge moment to grip this, and I would encourage them to play their part in whatever way they can. The honourable gentleman also mentioned exceptional financial support, and we've made it clear that while we continue to expect councils to do what they can to deliver for their residents, we do know, and we've heard this in this debate, that there is the sector is in a fragile state, and that some London councils are really struggling. And the honourable member for Bromley and Biggin Hill tempts me back to 1997 for where the origins of that might lie. And the Shadow Minister tried a little bit of that myself. I might gently say to him that I was just about out of short trousers at that time, so he's going to struggle to find me go along on the blame. And I would say to the Shadow Minister that maybe we should stand at the LJ conference and ask colleagues there whether they think the last decade or the decade before was a better one, because I've got a sense of what the answer might be, and I know he does too. But that exceptional financial support process will be there where councils need it. And we've been clear we want to reset how that works so that it's more collaborative and supportive, and unlike the previous government who perhaps took a more punitive approach to it. So one aspect of that is that when additional borrowing is needed to support recovery, we will not make that more expensive with the additional 1% premium that the previous government did. We will also take steps to prevent the disposal of community and heritage assets when that is considered as a route to financing capitalisation support, because we know how important that is to local communities. So, as has been said, there are 7 London councils that have requested support this year, and we are working with them to drive improvements. I think, exactly as the Honourable Gentleman for Uxbridge and South Rice have said, these must be now, and I've been through this process in my own city, a moment to grapple and to grasp that transformation process, to take those difficult decisions to get the local authority onto a stronger footing. Now, just to talk about a little bit about reform more generally, on the multi-year settlement, we know that, again, those year-by-year decisions that have been made, well, that's driven often by, settlement decisions. We used to get them always on Christmas Eve. It used to drive us mad. There's not much you can do on Christmas Eve. We need to be much better there, and that's why we're committed to the first multi-year settlement in a decade, giving councils that time to plan. But we also recognise, and this was said by the member for Ilford South, Hornchurch and Upminster, Romford, Bexley Heath and Crayford, Southgate and Wood Green, that the formula is out of date. And I think that that is a point of political consensus. And it has been years and years, and of course there was the Fair Funding Review under the previous administration, but that was not delivered. So what we have today is a system that does not represent best value for taxpayers, a system not getting money to where it's needed the most. So we are implementing a comprehensive and up-to-date assessment of needs and resources as part of the multi-year settlement from 26-27. So it is coming, and it's coming soon. And I thank those, and I know London councils will have done so, but those who have contributed to the recent consultation, and there'll be more discussion when we consult in further detail later in the spring. And I ask colleagues to engage in it in the spirit that we have today. And one, on the cold hard facts, we will be very clear about the formulas that we use and how those assumptions have been based. And I hope we can have the conversation on that level rather than perhaps, the Honourable Gentleman says we should steer away from the parochial. I think that's probably right. Which gives me a good moment to address the point on recovery grants, because this went to places where, weighted by population, deprivation outweighs council tax recovery. That was an emergency money to try and prop up the dangerous state of local authority funding. A difficult decision, but one we've been very clear why, one that's the formula is very much publicly available. I hope we can engage in those sort of difficult decisions in that spirit, because what's the alternative? You have senior leaders of governments standing at party events boasting at how they've been able to tilt formulas to get money out of deprived communities to other places. I think it was a particularly discrediting experience for the previous government, and that's one that we will not be replicating. Colleagues have mentioned national insurance contributions, and as part of the settlement we have announced an extra £550 million of support for local government. This is part, there's no doubt, of very difficult decisions that need to be made to balance the nation's finances. And the challenge for the opposition is they can only say what they're against, and what they can't say is that they don't want money to be going into the National Health Service, they don't want money to be going to local government, they don't want money to go into the police. So until and unless they're able to address that very fundamental balance of if not this, then what, then it fears that it just looks a little bit like the points are political rather than substantial. But I just want to end on a positive note, really, to say thank you to the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Leighton and Wanstead. I think he set a great tone for the debate and a great shape that colleagues have populated with their own thoughtful views and experiences. We are committed as a government to a reset relationship with local government where we work with them as partners. Similarly, I hope members of Parliament on their own behalf, on their community's behalf, on their council's behalf, feel they can contribute to that policy process of whatever political party and non, that to have that say on what formulas might come in the future, what priorities there might be for investment in the future, because I do believe we have a common goal in this space of a vibrant local authorities that deliver for their local communities day in, day out. I know that's what councillors want, and that's what officers want, that's what MPs want, and we certainly, as a government, want the same. Thank you.
Mr Calvin-Daly to wind up.
Thank you, Ms Lillbuck. And thank you, everyone that's contributed today. It will be interesting to see where I go with my first summation. I'll take feedback later. But I'd start by thanking thanking London councils, thanking the councils and councillors of London that deliver the outputs that we need. I'd like to thank Councillor Williams, Councillor Ryan in particular, but all the council leaders of London for showing leadership in a very challenging time. But I also want to thank the Mayor and thank the Minister in particular for the 11.3 billion 5.8% core increase. And I'm going to steal the words from the member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip when he said, London is special, it is different. London's government, local government is the gateway and it is everyone's front door. And I brought this speech, not this discussion, this debate about, not to draw out ideological challenges and to bring up some of the unpleasant aspects that were discussed, but to tackle the things, the problems and structural problems that have been there and languishing and have been untouched for so long. And I just would like to come back on the point that I should be wary of what I wish for when we bring about a debate. I'm not. I'm wary of Conservative leadership. I'm happy and welcome partnership and the approach that the government has that allows us to bring these debates about, knowing that we will bring better settlements for all of those people.